If you've ever wondered what betrayal smells like, I can tell you. It's not blood or whiskey, it's champagne. The Azure Ballroom was drenched in it that night, rivers of golden bubbles running through crystal flutes, laughter sharp enough to cut through the string quartet. My daughter Chloe stood beneath a chandelier that looked like it had been stolen from heaven itself, smiling the kind of smile that photographs lie about. And next to her, Preston Vanderbilt, groom, millionaire, predator in tailored silk. I should have been happy. Everyone else was. The chandeliers shimmered over 1,000 white roses, the air humming with toasts and gossip. But my heart beat slower than the music, heavy with a strange awareness that something was wrong, that I was no longer the father of the bride, but a prop in someone else's show. Leo Morgan, the MC, announced, his voice booming through the ballroom. Father of the bride, a few words for the happy couple. 1,000 eyes turned toward me. My knees protested as I stood, the years catching up all at once. I wasn't nervous. I'd given speeches before, boardrooms, summits, groundbreaking ceremonies. But this was different. My throat tightened when I looked at Chloe. She looked radiant, yes, but her eyes, her mother's eyes, seemed distant, as if she were standing behind glass. I began softly. When I first held Chloe, I promised her 2 things. That I'd protect her, and that I'd make sure she grew up surrounded by beauty. Not wealth, but beauty, the kind you find in honesty, in kindness, in a life built with care. Applause rippled through the room, polite and brief. Preston's expression never changed, a half-smile carved from arrogance. I ignored him, pressing on. I may not have given her the world, but I gave her a foundation, one she could build upon. Today, I hope she continues that legacy with someone who cherishes her. I lifted my glass, but before I could drink, Preston's voice cut through the applause. Beautiful speech, Leo, he said, loud enough for the crowd. Though I think the foundation's starting to crack, don't you? The room hesitated. Laughter flickered uncertainly. I managed a faint smile. Age cracks everything eventually, I said, even marble. Preston chuckled, leaned toward the mic. Well, at least marble's still useful after it breaks. Can't say the same for... He stopped just long enough to let the crowd lean in. For some people. The laughter that followed wasn't hesitant this time. It was full-throated, hungry. Chloe's smile froze. My fingers tightened around the glass stem, but I didn't speak. You learn, with age, that silence can sting harder than words. Yet Preston wasn't finished. Come on, Leo, he said, motioning toward the cake, a monstrous, glittering tower of white and gold. You built skyscrapers. Surely you can help me cut this little thing. The guests roared with laughter again. I approached, careful, still hoping this was some twisted joke. The cake gleamed beneath the chandeliers, 7 layers of absurdity, each one worth more than most men's cars. I reached for the knife. Preston smiled, and that's when it happened. A sudden shove, deliberate, merciless, sent me forward. My face plunged into the cake. The room gasped, then erupted. Cameras flashed. Someone howled with laughter. Sugar filled my nostrils. Frosting caked my glasses. I stood there, dripping in luxury and humiliation. When I pulled away, the cake looked like a crime scene. The laughter wouldn't stop, waves of it crashing against me. Even Chloe, my daughter, was frozen, her lips parted but silent. I searched for her eyes, but she wouldn't meet mine. The music resumed too quickly, the way people resume living after an accident, pretending nothing's wrong. Preston clapped a hand on my shoulder. Hey, no hard feelings, old man. Lighten up, it's a wedding. And the crowd laughed again. They always do when the powerful humiliate the powerless. Except I wasn't powerless. Not yet. I wiped the frosting from my face and smiled, because I understood something in that moment. Something neither Preston nor his glittering parasites could ever comprehend. You can humiliate a man like me once, but never twice. As the laughter echoed through the Azure Ballroom, I felt something inside me shift, not my pride, but my patience. Pride can bend. Patience, once broken, cuts. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the mirrored wall, a man covered in sugar and silence, but behind the frosting, my eyes were cold and awake. The string quartet picked up again. The chandeliers shimmered. The sharks went back to smiling. And as the night unfolded, as toasts rose and laughter swelled, I quietly made a new vow, one I didn't share with anyone. This would be the last time they laughed at Leo Morgan. It began weeks before the cake, before the laughter, before the frosting dripped from my hair. It began with an offer, one I thought was a gift of love, not a spark to ignite contempt. I had called Chloe one quiet afternoon, the lake outside my study frozen under pale winter sunlight. "Sweetheart," I'd said, "I've been thinking about your wedding. I want to host it at the Grand Majestic." She'd gone silent for a second. I could almost hear her thinking, hear Preston's voice behind her. "Dad," she said softly, "that's generous. But Preston and his mother already have a vision." A vision. That word stuck to my ribs like bad whiskey. The Grand Majestic wasn't just another hotel. It was my hotel, the crown jewel of Morgan Developments. I bought it in '94, a crumbling 1928 relic slated for demolition. I spent 5 years and most of my soul restoring it to life. Marble staircases reborn, stained glass resurrected. Chandeliers whispering the language of old wealth. Every corner told a story, mine, Isabella's, Chloe's childhood summers, spent racing through half-finished hallways. It was more than a building. It was a monument to everything I'd built with my hands, my grief, and my hope. But to the Vanderbilts, legacy meant nothing unless it came with a price tag. When I finally met Preston and his mother, Diana, to discuss it, the insult came wrapped in politeness. "Oh, Leo," Diana said, smiling that porcelain smile people use before stabbing you with it. "The Grand Majestic is lovely, really a testament to vintage enthusiasm. But Preston and Chloe deserve something modern, fresh, not so old-fashioned." Old-fashioned. I could almost feel the dust they imagined clinging to me. Preston chuckled beside her, his hand resting casually on Chloe's chair. "Yeah, Leo, we're thinking something with a rooftop view. Glass, steel, infinity pool, energy." He snapped his fingers for emphasis. I smiled, the way you do when someone calls your child ugly and you're not allowed to hit them. "Energy," I repeated. "You'll forgive me if I've always preferred structure." He grinned. "Structure's great, but you can't live in the past." I leaned back, studying him, the sculpted jaw, the expensive watch, the smugness of someone who believed money was the same as character. "The past built your future," I said. "Don't forget that." Chloe's hand found mine under the table, a silent plea. I squeezed it once and let go. She looked torn, but not enough to speak. When the meeting ended, Diana hugged me with all the warmth of a snake. "You're a remarkable man, Leo. So devoted to preservation." She paused, eyes glittering. "But I suppose not everyone is built for evolution." That night, I returned to the lake house and sat in my study, surrounded by blueprints. I ran my hand across the drawing of the Grand Majestic, the elegant curves of the facade, the careful symmetry I'd designed down to the last cornice. I'd built that place for beauty, not for applause. For meaning, not spectacle. And yet, my daughter's wedding, her one day to inherit the heart of our family, would be traded for a rooftop pool and designer cocktails. The rejection cut deeper than I'd expected. They hadn't just dismissed a venue. They'd dismissed me. Over the following weeks, the wedding machine rolled forward without me. Every detail was curated by Diana's team of planners. The guest list, the floral arrangements, even the brand of champagne. Chloe visited less often, her calls shorter, her tone rehearsed. "Preston's just busy," she'd say. "You know how planning gets." But I knew the truth. The distance between us wasn't measured in miles, but in voices. His louder, mine fading. Sometimes, late at night, I'd imagine Isabella's voice, calm, amused, always wise. "Don't chase them, Leo. They'll find out who they are soon enough." She'd been gone for 12 years, but she was still right about everything. I could almost see her smile, standing in the restored ballroom, the same one Chloe had played in as a girl, spinning under the chandeliers. The Grand Majestic deserved her laughter again. Instead, it would remain silent, replaced by the hollow echo of people who valued status over soul. The next morning, I drove to the hotel anyway. The staff greeted me with familiar smiles. The scent of polished wood and lilac filled the air. I walked through the lobby, my footsteps blending with faint piano music. For a moment, I imagined it, Chloe in her gown, the chandeliers glowing, Isabella's portrait watching from a mezzanine. It could have been perfect. It should have been perfect. But perfection, I realized, isn't something you offer to those who don't know what it's worth. That afternoon, I received an email from Chloe. "Dad, please don't be upset. Preston's family just wants something different. I still love you. Always." I stared at those words for a long time. Different. The Vanderbilts had taken my daughter's language and rewritten it. Different now meant better. Modern meant without you. That was the day the first crack appeared. Small, almost invisible. But cracks, as I'd learned in architecture, don't stay small. They spread quietly, patiently, until the whole structure gives way. And this family, my family, had just begun to crumble. The day I realized my daughter's wedding had become a transaction, not a celebration, was the day I stopped pretending we were family. It was a Thursday, gray, slow, and soaked with that kind of cold drizzle that makes everything feel slightly dishonest. The meeting had been arranged at the Vanderbilt Country Club, the kind of place where even the air smelled like entitlement and leather polish. Preston insisted we meet to finalize a few small details. I should have known that phrase from his mouth meant an ambush dressed in etiquette. When I arrived, the valet greeted me by name, the kind of respect they reserve for someone whose money once mattered. Inside, everything gleamed. Mahogany walls, portraits of men who'd never worked with their hands, and chandeliers that looked suspiciously cheaper than the ones in the Grand Majestic. I found Preston at the bar, laughing with a group of his friends. Identical men in identical suits, all teeth and ambition. "Leo," he said, clapping me on the shoulder as if we'd known each other for decades instead of months. "Glad you could make it. Chloe's running late, but we can start." He led me to a private dining room. On the table sat a sleek leather folder embossed with gold, the kind used for contracts, not family discussions. I took a seat, and he slid it toward me with a salesman's grin. "What's this?" I asked. "Just some suggestions," he said. "Things to elevate the wedding experience. You'll love it." I opened the folder. Inside, printed on ivory paper, was a list. At first I thought it was a menu: imported orchids, custom lighting design, European quartet, exclusive dessert showcase. Then I saw the total at the bottom, $97,430. Paid by me. "Suggestions," I repeated, my voice low. "You call this a suggestion?" He shrugged. "Well, you did say you wanted Chloe to have the best, right? I just made a few adjustments to make sure she gets it." "Adjustments," I said, scanning the items. "A champagne fountain for $10,000? A drone light show?" And I stopped blinking. "A crystal sculpture of the couple? Who even does that?" He smiled wider. "It's art, Leo. Symbolism. You can't put a price on legacy." I closed the folder slowly, my fingers trembling. "You've already put a price on it." The door opened then, and Chloe slipped in. She looked beautiful even in her worry. Hair pulled back, a simple dress that made her seem smaller than I remembered. "Dad," she said softly, "please don't be upset. Preston's just making sure the wedding matches his image." I interrupted. Her eyes dropped to the table. She didn't answer. That silence said everything. Preston leaned back, folding his hands behind his head. "Look, Leo, I know this might feel uncomfortable. You're from a generation that values sentiment. But weddings today? They're productions, experiences, investments." "Investments," I echoed. "In what?" He grinned. "In perception." For a long moment, no one spoke. The rain tapped against the windows, steady and patient. I studied him. The perfect air, the tailored arrogance, the hollow confidence of someone who'd never been told no. I'd spent my life building things meant to last. He spent his crafting illusions that looked expensive long enough to impress a crowd. I looked at Chloe again. Her fingers toyed with her engagement ring, twisting it as if trying to loosen it. She didn't look at me, not once. That was when the realization struck. I wasn't her father in this room. I was her sponsor. I stood slowly. "You'll get your show, Preston. I said quietly. But understand this. I'm not financing your ego. I'll contribute what a father should, not what a fool would. He chuckled. Come on, Leo. Don't make this awkward. You've got plenty. I leaned close enough that he could smell the bitterness in my breath. Not enough to waste on people who mistake wealth for worth. Then I left. Outside, the rain had turned to sleet. My car waited under the portico, the valet hurrying to open the door. As I sat behind the wheel, I didn't start the engine right away. My reflection stared back at me in the windshield. A man in his 60s, graying, tired, but not broken. The kind of man Preston would never understand until it was too late. That night, I found the invoice still in my coat pocket. I smoothed the paper flat on my desk and stared at the numbers again. $97,000 for illusions. It was more than an insult. It was a declaration. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as an account, one that could be drained until the balance hit zero. I poured myself a drink and stared out over the lake, the lights of my house reflected in the still water. The rain had stopped, but the world still felt soaked in something cold. For most of my life, anger had been a passing thing, a flicker, quickly smothered by reason. But that night, it lingered. It had weight, architecture, foundation. It wasn't rage, it was design. The next morning, I wrote a check for the exact amount on the invoice. Then I tore it into 100 pieces. The sound was quiet, almost delicate, like breaking a promise with grace. Something inside me hardened then. I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment I began drawing new blueprints, not for buildings, but for retribution. And unlike Preston's hollow creations, mine would stand forever. It arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning, the kind of morning that pretends nothing terrible could ever happen. The lake was still, the air thin with the last traces of winter, and I was sipping coffee in my study when I heard the faint crunch of tires on gravel. The mail truck came and went, leaving behind a stack of envelopes. Most were the usual bills, catalogs, political spam. But one stood out, a thick manila envelope, stamped with the letterhead of Vanderbilt and more attorneys at law. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. Then I noticed the return address, Old Mill Road, Preston's family estate. That name had always sounded more like a threat than a home. I opened it, and what spilled out wasn't mail. It was a declaration of war. Inside was a copy of Chloe and Preston's prenuptial agreement. I wasn't meant to see it, that much was clear. There was no note, no explanation, just a small sticky tab marking a page near the end. I don't know who sent it or why, but some part of me knew instantly that the universe had decided to lift a corner of the curtain. I began reading. The first pages were predictable, standard clauses, property rights, marital assets. But then I saw it. Upon the death of Leo Morgan, Chloe Vanderbilt shall inherit all assets and holdings currently in the Morgan estate, of which 50% shall be automatically transferred to Preston Vanderbilt. I read the line 3 times. It didn't make sense. It couldn't. It implied my death was an investment, my life an obstacle between Preston and half of everything I'd built. The words blurred. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My throat tightened, not from anger, but something deeper, disbelief, sorrow, betrayal layered upon betrayal. I had offered them the best I had, and now I was reduced to a clause in a contract, a countdown with a $sign attached. I called Chloe immediately. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice distracted, half asleep. Dad. Chloe, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I just received something from the Vanderbilt's lawyer. A prenup. It mentions. Her tone sharpened. You read it. I didn't go looking for it. It was sent to me. Chloe, it says that half of your inheritance, my life's work, will go to Preston when I die. Did you know about this? There was a long silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was tight. Dad, it's just paperwork. It doesn't mean anything. Paperwork. I said, my voice breaking. Chloe, that clause means everything. It means they expect to profit from your father's death. She exhaled sharply. You're overreacting. Preston explained it. It's just a safeguard, something his lawyers insisted on. He doesn't even care about your money. Then why is it written like that? Because you don't trust him, she snapped. you never have. That one hit harder than I expected. I tried to answer, but she spoke over me, her voice trembling now, whether from anger or guilt, I couldn't tell. You've always thought you could control everything. My life, my choices, my happiness. You can't, Dad. I love him. I'm marrying him. And if you can't accept that, maybe it's better we take a break. And then the line went dead. I stood there in my study, holding the silent phone, the morning light cutting through the blinds in sharp, merciless lines. I'd lost deals before, lost friends, even lost my wife, but this felt different. This was a different kind of death. The slow, invisible kind that doesn't end a life, but empties it. I looked at the prenup again, its legal language clean and indifferent. Every clause was a knife. I'd built my company brick by brick, saved every cent, sacrificed sleep and peace and years, not for wealth, but for her. And now, the man she called her husband-to-be was already counting the inheritance. That evening, I took a drive along Old Mill Road. The Vanderbilt estate sat behind iron gates, sprawling and smug. The windows glowed with the warmth of lives that never had to earn their comfort. I didn't go inside, I just watched. Watched the silhouettes through the windows, the laughter that carried faintly through the air. Somewhere in there, my daughter was being taught how to forget me. When I got home, I poured myself a drink and stared at the lake. The reflection of the moon trembled against the surface, fragile but unbroken. You always said people show their truth when money's involved, I whispered aloud, remembering Isabella's voice. Guess you were right again. I folded the prenup back into its envelope and locked it in my desk drawer. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because I needed to remember it. That document wasn't a threat. It was a blueprint. It showed me exactly what kind of man Preston was, and exactly what kind of plan I would need. Some fathers give blessings. Some give warnings. I was about to give something rarer, justice, carefully drawn. But that night, before the planning began, I allowed myself one small moment of grief. I stood on the porch, listening to the whisper of the wind through the trees, and I made a quiet promise, not to hurt them, not yet, but to make them see what they had tried to erase, the man behind the money, the father they had dismissed. They thought they'd written my ending, but I was only beginning the next chapter. They arrived on a Sunday. I remember because the church bells across the water were still ringing when Preston's silver car crunched up my gravel drive. It was early spring, the lake thawing, the air sharp with the scent of pine and rain. I hadn't invited them. They came anyway. Chloe stepped out first, all soft smiles and tentative eyes, holding a basket of muffins like peace offerings. Preston followed, wearing a blazer that probably cost more than my car. He carried nothing but confidence. Dad, Chloe said, walking up to hug me. She felt smaller than I remembered. We were in the area. Thought we'd stop by. In the area, 2 hours from Manhattan. I almost smiled. Of course, I said. Come in. The lake house had once been our sanctuary. Isabella and I built it stone by stone during summers when life was simpler. Every piece of wood had a memory. The oak cabinets we varnished together, the fireplace she insisted on facing the water, the study where I taught Chloe to draw her first blueprint. It wasn't just a house. It was the sum of everything we'd ever loved. Preston stepped inside, eyes scanning the place like an appraiser. Cozy, he said finally. A little dated, but nice. I poured coffee for us all. Dated things have history, I said. Not everything needs renovation. He chuckled. Sure, but imagine what this place could be with a little modernization. Open it up, tear down that wall, expand the view. You'd be amazed what light can do. It already has light, I said. The kind you can't buy. He smiled, patronizing, like a teacher humoring a slow student. Of course. Sentimental value. But you've got prime real estate here, Leo. Waterfront, secluded, good bones. If you ever decide to sell. I won't, I interrupted. He shrugged. Just saying, every asset should be liquid eventually. Chloe shot him a look. Preston, please. But her voice lacked conviction. We sat in the living room, the one Isabella had decorated with soft blues and worn leather. The sound of waves lapped softly against the dock. Preston leaned back, crossing his legs. You know, he said, We were actually thinking about starting our family near the water. Something peaceful, away from the city. Maybe this area. Something like this. Something like this. The words crawled under my skin. Chloe smiled faintly. We've been talking about it a lot. Preston thinks space like this would be great for the kids someday. I looked at her. The way she said kids someday, as though the future were already written in his voice. It's a beautiful idea, I said quietly. Just not here. Preston grinned. Come on, Leo. You can't live here forever. Golden Meadows has some incredible homes for active seniors. Golf, lake views, great community. You'd love it. I stared at him for a long time. Golden Meadows, I repeated. A retirement village. Not a village, he corrected. A lifestyle. Chloe tried to interject, but I held up a hand. Let me get this straight, I said. You came here to tell me my home should be yours, and my future should be a brochure? He blinked, then laughed lightly, pretending I was joking. Come on, Leo. Don't take it personally. We're just talking possibilities. Possibilities? I said. Right. The rest of the visit blurred, polite chatter over coffee that tasted like rust. When they finally left, Chloe hugged me again. He doesn't mean to sound harsh, she whispered. He just wants things planned out. I'm sure he does, I said. You always like planners. She hesitated, looking into my eyes. Dad, please don't make this harder. Preston's trying. I nodded, though I didn't believe it. Drive safe, I said. When their car disappeared down the road, the silence that followed was almost physical. I walked through the house, the creak of floorboards, the hum of a lake beyond the windows. Every corner of this place carried Isabella's touch, her handwriting on the pantry labels, her favorite scarf still hanging by the door. I sat by the fireplace and stared at the empty chairs across from me. He wanted to open it up, tear down walls, modernize. But what he really meant was to erase her, and in doing so erase me. That night, I went out to the dock. The lake was still, the moon stretching a silver path across the surface. I watched it for a long time, hands buried in my coat pockets. Somewhere in that reflection, I saw not the face of an aging man, but a builder, someone who knew that when a foundation cracked, you didn't abandon it. You reinforced it. They wanted to move me out, write me off, bury me under plans. But they'd forgotten something crucial. I was the architect of this life. I knew every beam, every weakness, every secret passage in the structure they thought they could inherit. I picked up a stone and tossed it into the water. The ripples spread outward, perfect circles widening in silence. That's when the idea came. Small at first, like those ripples, but inevitable in its reach. I would not sell my home. I would not retire quietly. And I would not let Preston Vanderbilt redesign my life. He wanted light? I'd give him a blaze so bright he'd never forget it. Rehearsal dinners are supposed to be warm, intimate things, family and laughter, a preview of celebration. But the one at Aperture Restaurant felt more like a performance staged for an audience I hadn't auditioned for. Everything gleamed. Glass, silver, smiles. The place sat on the 57th floor of a tower Preston's company didn't own, but often claimed credit for designing. The walls were a mirror of the city, all lights and reflections, no soul. I arrived on time, which turned out to be my first mistake. The Vanderbilts were already seated, surrounded by friends whose laughter was a little too rehearsed. Chloe caught my eye and smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. She looked tired, the kind of tired you get when your happiness depends on pretending. Dad, she said, standing to kiss my cheek. You made it. Wouldn't miss it, I said. Preston rose, beaming as though he'd just closed a deal. Leo. Right on time, impressive. He clapped me on the shoulder and gestured to a seat near the end of the table. We saved you a spot with a view. A view, yes, of everyone's backs. Dinner moved briskly. Course after course, champagne after champagne. Conversation swirled around me, real estate, luxury cars, politics nobody believed in. I spoke when spoken to, smiled when required, and watched. You can tell a lot about people when they think you've stopped mattering. Halfway through the evening, Preston stood, tapping his glass. The chatter died instantly. He grinned like a man with the room in his pocket. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, raising his drink, thank you for joining us tonight. Tomorrow, Chloe and I begin the rest of our lives together. But before that, I wanted to take a moment to honor someone special, a man without whom none of this would be possible. My future father-in-law, Leo Morgan. Applause scattered across the room. I looked at Chloe. She smiled uncertainly, sensing something in his tone. Preston continued. Leo's a legend in his field, built some of the most solid structures in the city. Though, of course, he's had a few collapses along the way. A few polite chuckles. He glanced at me. But that's okay. Age does that to all of us, right, Leo? We start forgetting the difference between blueprints and ruins. Laughter now, louder this time. I felt the air thin around me. He wasn't done. I mean, honestly, we should all thank him for his generosity. Without his support, Chloe and I might have had to settle for something less than perfect. But he insisted on helping. That's commitment. Another wave of laughter. My hands stayed flat on the table. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. Of course, Preston added, pretending to lower his voice. He's also made arrangements for his future. We've even found the perfect place for him, Golden Meadows. Beautiful community, great views. We thought it'd be nice for him to relax after the wedding, let go of all that stress. Isn't that right, Leo? Applause erupted. Toasts lifted. Even Chloe looked stunned, her lips parting in disbelief. I stood slowly, steadying myself against the table. The room quieted, sensing something shifting. I met Preston's gaze, that smug, boyish grin, and smiled back. Thank you, Preston, I said, for thinking of my future. You're right, I've built a lot in my life. Towers, bridges, homes. But my proudest construction project has always been patience. He blinked, unsure where I was going. And you've tested it beautifully, I said, raising my glass. To new beginnings. I drank, then set the glass down gently. For the rest of the night, I said nothing. I listened. I observed. I etched every detail into memory. The smirk, the laughter, the way Diana Vanderbilt's pearl necklace glinted when she leaned in to whisper something to her son. I didn't feel humiliation anymore. Not even anger. I felt something purer, purpose. When the dinner ended, I walked out alone, the city wind sharp against my face. I stood on the curb watching the taxis blur past, neon lights reflecting on wet pavement. Behind me, laughter spilled from the restaurant like a sickness. I thought about what Preston had said, Golden Meadows. The audacity of it, the confidence. He truly believed he'd written me out of my own story. He believed money and marriage had made him untouchable. But I had been building longer than he'd been breathing. I drove home in silence. When I reached the lake house, the night was still, the water smooth as glass. I stood by the fireplace, staring at Isabella's photograph on the mantel. She'd always known how to read the world before it happened. You were right, I whispered. They're not just greedy. They're cruel. The fire crackled softly. I felt it then, the final fracture inside me, the clean break where patience ended and something colder began. I went to my study and opened the drawer that held the old files, financial ledgers, legal drafts, the trust papers Isabella and I had designed years ago but never activated. We had called it the Sunset Protocol, a safeguard, a fortress of ink and law. Back then, it had been about protection. But now, it would become something else entirely. I ran my fingers across the folder. Every blueprint begins with a line. Every reckoning begins with a decision. Tomorrow, the world would still see me as an old man, quiet, gentle, fading. But inside, the architect was awake again. And this time, I wasn't building structures. I was building an ending. I didn't sleep that night. The house creaked inside, as if it knew what I was about to do. By dawn, the decision was made. I sat at my desk, coffee cold beside me, papers spread like battle plans across the oak surface. The folder labeled Sunset Protocol lay open, untouched since Isabella's death. It was supposed to be a safety measure, a plan to protect our legacy from hostile investors or opportunists. I never thought I'd use it against family. The rules were simple, elegant. Isabella had helped write them herself. Every major asset we owned, from hotels to land to stocks, was controlled by the Isabella Morgan Legacy Trust. The trust's ownership structure was layered through a network of holding companies so dense that even the sharpest attorney would lose the trail halfway through. The assets didn't belong to me, they belonged to the trust. The only person with activation rights was me, and after that, Evelyn Reed. Evelyn. My lawyer, my friend, my last true ally. She was the only one who knew the full design of the trust. I picked up the phone and dialed her number. She answered on the second ring. Leo, she said, her voice calm, steady, always a step ahead. I was wondering when you'd call. You know why I'm calling, I said. I do. You want to activate it? Yes. There was a pause. Once we start, there's no going back. I'm aware. She exhaled. All right. Then meet me at the firm at noon. We'll make it official. When I arrived, the city looked different, sharper, colder. Evelyn's office was all glass and steel, minimalist and silent. She stood by the window, holding a thin folder. Before we do this, she said, you need to understand what activation means. The trust becomes self-governing. Preston can't touch it. Neither can Chloe, at least not until certain conditions are met. What conditions? That the trustees, you and I, agree she's acting in good faith. If not, her access is frozen. Permanently. I nodded. Good. She studied me. You're sure this is revenge, not protection? It's both, I said. They're about to learn the difference. We signed the documents in silence. When the final pen stroke dried, something inside me settled. The trust was live. My empire had just disappeared from public view, untouchable, invisible, immune. Evelyn handed me a sealed envelope. These are your final directives. In case something happens to you. I'm not planning on dying anytime soon, I said. Neither was Isabella, she replied softly. I slipped the envelope into my coat pocket. That evening, back at the lake house, I poured a glass of scotch and sat by the fire. The phone buzzed, a message from Chloe. Dad, can we talk soon? Preston says we should go over financials before the wedding. He wants transparency. Transparency. The word nearly made me laugh. I typed my reply slowly. Of course. Let's discuss it at the wedding. She responded with a heart emoji. I stared at it for a long time, wondering when our conversations had been reduced to symbols instead of words. By midnight, the first phase of the sunset protocol had begun automatically. I watched on my laptop as the ownership transfers executed in real time. The Grand Majestic, the Morgan Tower, the holdings in Chicago and Miami, all re-registered under Isabella Holdings, LLC. A digital vanishing act. By morning, the public record would show that Leo Morgan owned nothing. But the second part of the protocol wasn't about protection. It was about exposure. Phase 2. Retaliation. Evelyn's team of forensic accountants was already digging into the Vanderbilt's finances. She'd show me the first hints. Loans disguised as gifts, shell accounts in the Caymans, a family empire held together with duct tape and denial. Preston's wealth was a costume, impressive under the lights, hollow underneath. I felt no joy in knowing that, only clarity. Before going to bed, I walked down to the dock. The night was cold, the lake glassy and still. I thought of Isabella, her steady voice, her hands covered in blueprints and dust, the way she believed in planning not for comfort, but for truth. You'd have done the same, I whispered. For the first time in months, I slept without dreams. When morning came, I brewed coffee and watched the sunrise turn the lake to gold. The world outside had no idea that overnight, its balance of power had shifted. The Vanderbilts thought they were marrying into an empire. They were marrying into a ghost, one that would haunt them until they understood what they destroyed. That afternoon, Evelyn called again. It's done, she said. Everything's secure. But there's one more thing. What's that? I think it's time to make this public. Public. At the wedding, she said. In front of everyone. You want the truth to be undeniable? Let it be witnessed. I smiled, slow and tired. You're starting to sound like me. Maybe I've been listening too long, she said. Henry Harrison's still in Manhattan, by the way. He asked if you'd ever need him again. Henry, my old rival, once an enemy, now a friend forged in scars and mutual respect. The thought of him brought a flicker of warmth. Tell him to clear his schedule, I said. I think I've got a job for him. When I hung up, I looked around my study one last time. The shelves, the blueprints, the quiet. I felt something I hadn't in years. Focus. They had humiliated me in public. Now, I would return the courtesy, with precision. The wedding at the Azure Ballroom would not just be a celebration. It would be the unveiling of truth. And I would be the one to cut the ribbon. Manhattan always smells like ambition and exhaust. It's the scent of hunger dressed in perfume, of people who mistake movement for meaning. I hadn't been there in months, not since stepping back from Morgan Developments. But that morning, as the city opened like a steel flower beneath my cab window, I felt something awaken in me. Not nostalgia, not regret. Calculation. Evelyn had arranged the meeting. Henry Harrison owes you, she'd said. He'll take the call. Owes me was an understatement. 20 years earlier, Henry and I had been bitter rivals. Two men clawing for the same skyline, the same clients, the same legacy. He was brilliant, ruthless, and reckless. When his empire began to crumble, I was the one who threw him a line instead of an anchor. He never forgot that. His office was in Midtown now, smaller, quieter, but still lined with that faint arrogance successful men never fully shed. When I walked in, he rose from his desk, grinning. Leo Morgan, he said. Still walking like you own the ground under you. Habit, I said. Good to see you, Henry. He poured 2 glasses of bourbon, the expensive kind that pretends to taste like forgiveness. Evelyn said you've got a problem. Not a problem, I said, taking the glass. An event. He chuckled. And you need me for the part where it becomes public. He leaned forward, curiosity sharpening his face. Tell me. So I did. I told him everything. The prenuptial clause, the insults, the country club invoice, the cake, the dinner, all of it. I watched his grin fade as the story darkened. When I finished, he set his drink down and said quietly, You're serious about this. Dead serious. And the trust. Activated. Every asset's protected. Preston's marrying into air. He nodded slowly, impressed despite himself. And you want the reveal at the wedding? Yes. Evelyn will handle the legal side. You'll handle the spectacle. The spectacle, he repeated, smiling again. You always did understand theater, Leo. I sipped my bourbon. If they're going to humiliate me in front of a crowd, I'll return the favor, but with truth instead of frosting. Henry laughed. God, I missed this side of you. He moved to his computer, fingers flying across the keyboard. I can have a press contact at the Times there under the guise of a lifestyle feature. I'll invite a few financial reporters, too. Nothing sells faster than a society scandal. Good, I said. I want witnesses. The more, the better. He turned back to me. You sure about Chloe? Public exposure could burn her too. I hesitated. That was the question I'd been avoiding. The splinter under every plan. My daughter was caught in the middle of this mess, but she'd chosen her side long before I had. I'll spare her if I can, I said, but I won't spare the truth. He nodded once. Understood. We spent the next hour mapping the sequence like a military operation. Evelyn would arrive first with the trust documents. Henry would coordinate the timing, when to cue the interruption, when to drop the evidence. I'd stand by, waiting for the right moment to watch everything unravel. When we were done, Henry sat back, studying me. You've changed, he said. Used to be you fought to win. Now you fight to end. Maybe those are the same thing, I said. He smiled faintly. You know, for what it's worth, Leo, I respect this. Most men your age fade quietly. You're about to burn down an empire with paperwork. Fire's messy, I said. I prefer precision. Outside, the city was a blur of motion, taxis honking, sirens wailing, the endless heartbeat of commerce. I stood by the window, watching it all, feeling strangely calm. For months I'd been drifting, reacting. Now I was building again, not towers, but truth. Henry joined me at the window. You ever think about what comes after? He asked. After what? After you win. I thought about the lake, the quiet mornings, the reflection of the world in still water. I thought about Chloe as a child, running through the halls of the Grand Majestic, her laughter echoing off marble. I thought about Isabella, her patience, her clarity, her belief that truth was worth any cost. Yes, I said finally. I've thought about it. I just haven't decided if it'll be peace or loneliness. Henry clapped my shoulder. Maybe both. But either way, you'll have the satisfaction of finishing what you started. As I left his office, Evelyn called. Everything's set, she said. The documents are authenticated. The transfer's complete. The only thing left is your signal. You'll have it, I said. Leo, she added softly. This is going to make headlines. Once it's done, there's no walking it back. I'm counting on that. I hung up and stepped into the Manhattan wind. The city stretched around me. Towers I'd helped design standing like witnesses to the man I used to be. For the first time in years, I felt alive. I walked past the Grand Majestic on my way back to the station. Its marble columns gleamed in the afternoon light, proud and defiant. Preston had called it old-fashioned. I called it permanent. When I reached the revolving doors, I paused. Inside, guests milled through the lobby, businessmen, tourists, a young couple admiring the chandelier. They didn't know that the entire building belonged to a ghost named Isabella. I smiled to myself. The city moves fast, but truth moves faster when you give it direction. In 1 week, the Azure Ballroom would glitter with champagne and music again. The same crowd that had laughed as I fell would be there, smug, confident, unaware that the floor beneath them was already shifting. And when it did, they wouldn't hear thunder. They'd hear my name. Weddings always begin with music, the kind designed to hide tension beneath elegance. The Azure Ballroom shimmered again that morning, every chandelier blazing like captured lightning. Guests floated between champagne towers and photo booths, a parade of money pretending to be love. I stood near the back, invisible by design, watching the performance unfold. The last time I'd been here, Preston had shoved my face into a cake. Tonight, I'd be the one cutting it, metaphorically and far deeper. Chloe looked radiant, I'll admit that. Her gown shimmered like moonlight. Her hair was a soft echo of Isabella's. When our eyes met across the room, she smiled, tentative but genuine. I almost forgot the plan for half a second. Almost. Preston was all charm, shaking hands, laughing too loudly, every gesture rehearsed. He was the star of his own production. His mother, Diana, glided behind him, ensuring the cameras caught her from the right angle. The Vanderbilts believed this day would cement their dynasty. But the foundations had already been stolen from under them. I felt a tap on my shoulder. Henry Harrison, impeccable in a dark suit, handed me a small earpiece. Everything's ready, he murmured. Evelyn's downstairs. She brought the documents. I nodded. Timing. When they cut the cake, he said. Poetic, don't you think? I smiled faintly. Perfect. The ceremony began. The minister spoke of eternity and trust. Words that hung heavy, ironic. Chloe's voice trembled as she said her vows, but when she glanced at Preston, it steadied. He delivered his with the smooth confidence of a salesman closing a deal. Rings exchanged, applause rose, music swelled. Cameras flashed like gunfire. Then came the reception. The champagne flowed, the lights dimmed, and Preston took the microphone. Before we dance, he said, grinning, I just want to thank everyone, and especially my father-in-law, Leo Morgan, for teaching me what not to do with money. Laughter. Always laughter. I watched Chloe's expression falter, a flicker of embarrassment, gone as quickly as it came. Preston turned to the cake, a towering monstrosity of sugar and pride. Let's make this official, he said, lifting the silver knife. Cameras leaned in, phones ready. That was Henry's cue. The ballroom doors opened. Evelyn entered, calm as a storm that knows its path. Her navy suit gleamed under the chandeliers. Behind her, two assistants rolled in a cart stacked with folders and a portable projector. Excuse me, she said, her voice cutting clean through the chatter. I believe, before we cut the cake, there's a matter of ownership to clarify. The room froze. Preston blinked, confused. I'm sorry, who are you? Evelyn smiled. Evelyn Reed, counsel to the Isabella Morgan Legacy Trust. The projector flared to life, flooding the far wall with a document. The deed to the Azure Ballroom. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the name glowed large and clear. Isabella Holdings, LLC, property of the Morgan Legacy Trust. This ballroom, she continued, along with the Grand Majestic Hotel, the Morgan Tower, and all associated assets, are legally owned by the trust. Not by Preston Vanderbilt, not by the Vanderbilt family, and certainly not by any joint marital entity. Preston laughed, but it was hollow. This is insane. You can't just. Evelyn raised a hand. I can and I am. Additionally, she said, clicking to the next slide, the prenuptial agreement signed by Mr. Vanderbilt and Mrs. Chloe Morgan was drawn under false pretenses. The inheritance clause granting Mr. Vanderbilt 50% of future assets is void, because those assets no longer exist. They were transferred months ago, beyond his reach. The laughter stopped. The only sound was the quiet hum of the projector. Diana Vanderbilt rose from her seat, her face drained of color. What is this? Preston. Preston's voice cracked. She's lying. This is some trick. Henry stepped forward from the crowd. It's no trick, Preston. I verified the documents myself. Your accounts, the shell companies, the offshore loans, they're all here. He nodded to Evelyn, who switched to another slide. Bank records, transactions, dates, all glowing proof of the Vanderbilt's empire of debt. Whispers rippled through the guests, sharp as broken glass. A few phones were already recording. Evelyn's voice softened now, deliberate. And one final note. Upon Leo Morgan's passing, his remaining personal estate will not go to family. It will fund the Isabella Morgan Children's Foundation, dedicated to housing and education programs. That was his late wife's wish. Chloe's hand flew to her mouth. Tears welled, but she said nothing. Preston staggered toward me, his face a mix of rage and disbelief. You did this? I looked him in the eye. No, Preston. You did this. I just drew the plans. He lunged forward, but security intervened. Henry's men, efficient and quiet. The crowd erupted in chaos. Gasps, murmurs, camera flashes. The cake remained untouched, towering over the wreckage of pride. I took one step forward and looked at my daughter. Chloe, I said softly, I wanted to give you a future. But you chose someone who only wanted your inheritance. Now you know which one of us built something real. Her voice cracked. Dad, I didn't know. I believe you, I said. But believing doesn't rebuild trust. You'll have to do that on your own. Evelyn shut off the projector. Henry nodded at me, quiet approval in his eyes. The room around us felt smaller now, the chandeliers dimmer, the laughter long gone. I picked up a napkin, wiped the last bit of frosting from my memory, and turned to leave. Behind me, Preston's voice broke. A sound between a plea and a curse. You'll regret this, old man. I didn't look back. I already did, I said. That's why I stopped. And then I walked out of the morning after the storm. Calm, was the kind of quiet that feels earned. The lake was a perfect mirror, still and silver, the sky painted in the faintest blush of dawn. For the first time in years, there were no phones ringing, no lawyers calling, no echoes of laughter from people who mistook cruelty for charm. Only the soft creak of the dock.